One of the great challenges that Spinoza poses for an Enlightenment Jewish thinker like Mendelssohn concerns how to reconcile particularistic Jewish practices with Enlightenment standards of universal reason. Surely Jews themselves admit that non-Jews don't need to keep the laws of kashrut, for example, in order to be considered righteous. But if that's the case, then we've admitted that the laws are not universal and hence, at least by the lights of Enlightenment standards, not rational. So how are we to square this circle? We should note, incidentally, that Mendelssohn has actually made life even more difficult for himself as a result of his general philosophy. Firstly, given his view that faith can't be coerced but must be a voluntary matter, it seems as if he had better find some justification for the ritual mitzvot. If it's not good enough in his view to observe them out of fear of authority, indeed, as we have seen, he wants to remove any rabbinic powers to coerce Jewish observance, it seems as if we're really going to need some independent reason to observe the mitzvot. Secondly, we've already encountered his moral argument against the idea that God could have revealed truths at Sinai. The basics of the argument, to recap, are that eternal truths were necessary for the happiness or salvation of all human beings, so it would be unfair of God to only reveal such truths to the Jews. That would exclude everyone but the Jews from possibly achieving human happiness, and surely a good or a just God would not do such a thing to the majority of humanity. And if that's the case, then similarly, his rationalization of the mitzvot can't make them essential to human happiness, or else we're going to have the same problem. If the mitzvot are truly the universal route to human happiness, then why would a just God only reveal them to a tiny proportion of humanity and exclude all of the rest from the possibility of salvation? Basically, God needs to make the mitzvot important enough or rational enough for Jews to observe them, without making them so important that one would have to observe them in order to reach the ultimate human goal. So Mendelssohn is walking something of a tightrope in his attempts to justify the mitzvot. The truth is that you've already encountered his argument for the rationality of mitzvot in what you've read. Thus, for example, on page 99 he writes that all laws refer to or are based upon eternal truths of reason, or remind us of them and rouse us to ponder them. So his starting point is that the laws are reminders of those eternal truths, that is, the existence of God, immortality, and providence. And given that belief in those truths is necessary for human happiness, it would obviously be rational to do things that remind us of them. He writes again on page 128 that these laws guide the inquiring intelligence to divine truths, though he adds this time that the ceremonial laws also was the bond which was to connect action with contemplation, life with theory. Now, this idea of connecting life with theory is particularly important, for if God wants us to know these eternal truths, why not just teach them to us and be done with it? Mendelssohn's point perhaps can be found on page 118, where he notes how difficult it is to preserve such abstract ideas simply by writing them down, for example. Incidentally, in a lengthy discussion that some critics find to be very problematic, Mendelssohn sees the written word as the first step on the road to idolatry, whereas actions, on the other hand, come and go, and in his view they're not permanent enough to lead to such problems. But basically then, in order to imprint these truths in our minds or our souls, God connects laws to our everyday activities. So now if all the things we do make us think of our duties to God, then we're reminded of these eternal truths constantly, without having to take time out in a library-like atmosphere in order to contemplate them. I'm reminded of them by doing something as simple as eating, by making a bracha, for example. So the mitzvot are closely related to the speculative knowledge of religion and the teachings of morality. What though of the question of fairness? Why have only the Jews been given these mitzvot if they're so important? Now, Mendelssohn answers this question in a way which may or may not be entirely satisfying by referring to the idea of the Jews as a priestly nation who will call attention to these truths, as you can see in this particular quote. The idea seems to be that by observing mitzvot, we are the keepers of the flame. We represent these truths to the world, to all nations, through our observance of these strange laws. So when a non-Jew sees or hears of the Jews' strange practices, they're also reminded of God's existence, for they know that the Jews were given these mitzvot at Sinai by God, even if they believe that those laws have since been superseded, as would Christians, for example. But in this way, our observance of mitzvot actually plays a role in keeping the truths that are essential to human happiness at the forefront of everyone's mind, making our observance of them rational, but allowing others who do not do them themselves to nonetheless benefit from the Jews doing them. Clever, huh? Though it does rather leave those people who have never heard of Judaism, of course, in the lurch. That question of fairness just won't go away, it seems.